The generation of protest music. During the 1960s and leading into the 70s, change was everywhere, and protests were behind it all. The music reflected the protests, and music was available in a wide range of genres, from pop to rock to soul. The music at the time brought people together and helped build a culture for the new generation. In 1961, America began sending a considerable amount of military troops to Vietnam, a war that would continue until 1973. The war was unpopular in America, and approximately 58,000 Americans were killed in the conflict. Because of the unpopularity of the war, there was an incredible amount of protest within the United States. The movement against U.S. involvement in Vietnam began small among peace activists and intellectuals on college campuses, but gained national prominence in 1965 after the U.S. began bombing North Vietnam. Anti-war marches and other protests attracted a widening base of support over the next 3 years, peaking in early 1968. On October 21, 1967, one of the most prominent anti-war demonstrations took place, and some 100,000 protesters gathered at the Lincoln Memorial. Around 30,000 of them continued in a march to the Pentagon later that night. After brutal confrontation with the soldiers, hundreds of demonstrators were arrested. Though the mass majority of Americans supported the administration policy in Vietnam, a small but outspoken minority was making its voice heard by the end of 1965. This included many students as well as artists and members of the hippie movement, which were a growing number of young people who rejected authority and embraced the drug culture. From Bob Dylan to the Beatles, a number of notable music artists played music that criticized the U.S. involvement. In 1963, the same year JFK was shot, Bob Dylan released Blowin' in the Wind, a song that asks the rhetorical questions about peace, war, and freedom. He does not say what he thinks, but leaves the listener wondering if the answers are clear and obvious, or if the answers are unpredictable as the wind. This song not only asks about Vietnam, but also addresses the frustration of African Americans in the U.S. Blowin' in the Wind has been described as the anthem of the 1960s civil rights movement. This song hit home in people across the world for all different reasons, but all hoping to find the solution for peace. Another important musician of the Vietnam movement was John Lennon. During his famous Bet-In in Montreal, his equivalent to a peaceful sit-in, John Lennon wrote the anthem to an anti-war movement and his first single hit after leaving the Beatles. The song was called Give Peace a Chance. Although there is no mention to the Vietnam War in the lyrics, it is often sung across the country to end the war in Vietnam. In December 1969, John and Yoko spread their message of peace with billboards reading, "War is over, if you want it. Happy Christmas from John and Yoko." These billboards went up in 11 major cities. Then, in 1971, John Lennon came out with Imagine, one of my personal favorite songs. Imagine, they said Lennon may have been a dreamer, but I think most of us would agree the world should be as one, sharing all the world has to offer. To remind our fellow neighbors of the simple but powerful message, the word Imagine is spelled out on the sidewalks in Central Park in the area known as Strawberry Fields. This area was dedicated to him across from his apartment where he had been shot. Even psychedelic soul-funk got into the anti-war movement. In 1969, Edwin Starr put out a #1 hit on the Billboard 100s with the song War, What Is It Good For? This was one of Motown's first songs to make a political statement. This song was originally recorded for The Temptations, but was released by Edwin Starr because Motown Records was afraid the song was too controversial for The Temptations and didn't want to upset their fan base. War lifted Starr's career, and he adopted the image of an outspoken liberal for many of his other hits during the early 1970s. While catchy melodies can capture a listener's attention, the lyrics of the music spoke to the minds of a disillusioned generation. In many ways, the 1960s represented the forefront of using music and the accompanying culture to speak out against war. The musicians at the time helped to inspire people to stand up and unite the people who wanted change. People were looking for equal rights for women and all races, clean environments, and independence from social norms. The major subculture movement that came about was the hippie movement, which was influenced by the European Bohemian movement and influences of Eastern religion and spirituality. From around 1967, its fundamental ethos included harmony with nature, communal living, artistic experimentation, particularly in music, and the widespread use of recreational drugs spread around the world. The hippie movement was very important to the protest music of the 60s. The hippies of the 60s had a huge influence on the youth culture of the United States and eventually around the world, and still influences live on today. Hippies believed in entering into the age of Aquarius, a time of extraordinary renewal where we would all become unified. This is what led to the hit Aquarius, Let in the Sunshine, from the Broadway hit musical Hair, which was covered by the Fifth Dimensions. The lyrics of the songs are based on the astrological belief that the world would soon be entering the age of Aquarius, an age of love, light, and humanity. The thought was that we were living in the age of Pisces, which was filled with inflation, recession, environmental problems, diminishing resources, unrest, and oppression. And we were now entering the age of extraordinary renewal known as the time of Aquarius. This song was one of the most popular hit songs in 1969 worldwide and in the United States. It reached the #1 position on both the Billboard Hot 100 for 6 weeks in April and May and Billboard Adult Contemporary charts. It also reached the top of the sales charts in Canada and elsewhere. It was also ranked as the #1 single for 1969. The hippie movement influenced many different musical genres at the time. The next song that I bring up is considered significant in rock history because, together with the music of Jimi Hendrix, Stephen Wolf, and High Tide, it marked the time period when psychedelic music began to form heavy metal. The group was Iron Butterfly, and the song was In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. The title was supposed to be In the Garden of Eden. Someone had written In-Da-Gadda-Da-Vida, possibly while drunk, on a demo copy. A record company executive saw it and decided to use it as the title, since it sounded mystical and Eastern spirituality was in at the time. At this time, the Beatles were going to India and the Rolling Stones were experimenting with Indian instruments. At slightly over 17 minutes, it occupied the entire second side of the In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida album. The lyrics are simple and heard only at the beginning and end. There was also a radio edit version that went along, but it only lasted 2 minutes and 53 seconds. The next musician that I have to bring up is Jimi Hendrix. He was a huge influencer of music and people felt they had connected with him. He was widely regarded as one of the most influential electric guitarists in history and of popular music. Hendrix pioneered the use of the instrument as an electronic sound source. Players before him had experimented with feedback and distortion, but Hendrix turned those effects and others into controlled, fluid vocabulary. He was Woodstock's closing act, and he performed the longest set of the concert. During his time, Hendrix performed the Star-Spangled Banner, which is the national anthem of the U.S. That made Woodstock so famous. His version then became the anthem for counterculture. During his version, he imitated gunfires, the dropping of bombs, and flying rockets with his guitar, criticizing the politics and condemning the Vietnam War. The song signified not only the hippie movement, but also the dislike of the war. Another similar and important song from Hendrix was Machine Gun. Machine Gun was a song that ran nearly 12 minutes long. Hendrix's long guitar solo and percussion riffs combined with controlled feedback to stimulate the sounds of battlefields such as helicopters dropping bombs, explosions, machine guns, and the screaming and cries of those wounded. Up to this point, most of Hendrix' songs were about spirituality and love. This was a change of direction, as the song is told from the perspective of a soldier trapped in a war. This song was inspired by the Vietnam War, the Black Panther Party, and the business struggles Hendrix was dealing with. Jimi Hendrix's life was short, but his impact on the rock guitar is still being heard, which sets the course for a new era of rock music. 1968 was a unique and eventful year. Student riots were at an all-time high in Western countries. On April 23rd, the Columbia University occupation began and lasted for 7 days, till police stormed the building and violently removed the students. Downtown, on June 3rd, Andy Warhol was shot by Valerie Solis. The next day, Robert Kennedy was shot in California after giving a speech about his victories in California. In September, women liberation groups target Miss America's beauty contest with protests in Atlantic City and their symbolic bra-burning demonstration. That year, Apollo 7, along with Apollo 8, were launched with growing interest in the space race. But most memorably, in 1968, was the year Martin Luther King Jr. died on April 4th, sparking riots across the nation, particularly in Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Kansas City, Newark, Washington, D.C., and many others. Across the country, 46 deaths will be blamed on the riots. This begins my next part of the presentation, which is protest movement of the 1960s civil rights. The main aim of the movement for civil rights included ensuring that the rights of all people are equally protected by law. This included the rights of minorities, women's rights, and LGBT rights. This movement and the people left behind both legacy of triumph and tragedy that was fired up through their passion. Their great emotions and actions led to progressive movements in society, along with music. While a wide range of art forms were associated with the civil rights movement, music certainly had the most impact on its early stages, as it was a medium by which people could express their disdain for the status quo. The musicians involved with the movement came from a mixture of backgrounds, and the music served as a source of empowerment for those who shared similar opinions. Being that jazz and blues were popular genres during this time, it was often played in music clubs throughout the U.S. Martin Luther King Jr. was once quoted as saying, "Jazz speaks for life. The blues tells the story of life's difficulties, and if you think for a moment, you realize that they have the hardest realities of life and put them into music, only to come out with some new hope or sense of triumph. This music is triumph music." The music that derived from the civil rights movement inspired people and even gave a sort of melting pot of radical, diverse listeners that would hope to change society. The song from the civil rights movement gave strength to the people to stand up for justice in the face of injustice. Therefore, these songs and chants of freedom were sung by protesters, activists, and civil rights leaders of both the 50s and 60s. Some of the songs that led to the changing music scene included The Roots' Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, The Staple Singers' Freedom Highway, Bob Dylan's The Times They Are A-Changin', Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come, Mavis Staples' We Shall Not Be Moved. We Shall Overcome is a protest song written by Pete Seeger that became the key anthem of the African American civil rights movement. It became popular when Guy Carwin stepped in as song leader at the Highlander, which was then a non-violent civil rights activism. It quickly became the movement's unofficial anthem. President Johnson, although himself a Southerner, used the phrase "We shall overcome" in addressing Congress on March 15, 1965, in a speech delivered after the violent Bloody Sunday attacks on civil rights demonstrators during the Selma to Montgomery marches. thus legitimizing the protest movement. We Shall Overcome was sung days later by over 50,000 attendees at Dr. King's funeral. In 1965, there was a gospel song that emerged called People Get Ready by the Mayfields and Impressions. People Get Ready was written in the year after the March on Washington. For many, it captured the spirit of the march. The song says, "There's a train a-comin', get ready." The train that is coming in the song speaks to the chance for redemption, the long-sought chance to rise above racism, to stand apart from despair and any desire for retaliation, an end to the cycle of pain. The song became one of the first gospel crossover hits, while at the same time continuing a tradition of American folklore. People Get Ready was awarded a Grammy Hall of Fame in 1998, its first year of eligibility. In fact, since its debut in 1965, People Get Ready has become a classic for many musicians. Bob Marley used the guitar riff in some of the lyrics in his reggae song One Love. Versions have also been sung by Rod Stewart, James Taylor, Phil Collins, and several others. The song has not only crossed racial barriers, but also generation walls as well. President Johnson then signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. The Civil Rights Act prohibited discrimination of all kinds based on race, color, religion, or national origin. The law also provided the federal government with the power to enforce desegregation.
Today, protest music still lives on. Although protests are not as prominent in the U.S. as they were in the 60s, the concern for foreign policy, the Iraq War, and the increasing interest in politics among American youth has led to new protests. One of the songs is Pink's "Dear Mr. President." The song is an open letter to the President of the U.S., George W. Bush. The song criticizes several areas of Bush administration, including the Iraq War, No Child Left Behind Act, disapproval of equal rights, lack of empathy for the poor and middle-class citizens. Another song is Green Day's "Wake Me Up When September Ends." This song was different than Green Day's typical songs of bumming around and criticized the Bush administration and the war. However, it later became a tribute song to the victims of Hurricane Katrina. One last song I think is very interesting is to the opposition of protest music was called "White People for Peace." The song questioned the use of recent spite on the anti-war protest songs, if the people that it's about don't even listen to it.
The protest music of the 60s was a product of the existing environment of the time in which the musicians who created it lived it. The 60s was an exciting time where real problems played out and people voiced their opinions for real solutions that could happen. Music helped to guide and inspire the people around the world to fight for what they believed in, so one day we could all live in peace and harmony. Today, and forevermore, it is always up to the people to choose what they want, and with new technology and events, it is up to us to create the next chapter in history and continue building the audio track of time. Thank you for listening.